for the final time this season, I'm Nathan Judah. I'm here with Wolverhampton Wanderers reporter, Mr. Liam Keane. Liam, Liverpool 2, Wolverhampton Wanderers 0. Wolves finished 14th in the table. What did you make of that game?
Well, it was a game that turned very quickly on the Nelson Semedo red card. Wolves never really recovered from that. Obviously, it's always difficult against Liverpool with 11 men, let alone with 10. They concede 2 quite poor goals, to be honest, and then have a second half that is a lot better, albeit with a few disappointing moments, not scoring when Aït-Nouri and Cunha go through, not being able to get back into the game. Look, the season's fizzled out well and truly, hasn't it? And they finish on 1 win out in the last 11, 8 losses in that time. Nothing but disappointing end to what's been a really good season overall.
Yeah, look, I mean, we weren't expecting much today, but at the same time, I thought that 11 versus 11, Wolves started pretty brightly.
Yeah, agreed.
They were well organised, they were passing the ball. Yeah, Liverpool having a bit of possession as well, as you'd expect today. Emotional day for the fans, a lot of the players and some of the kids are still on the pitch behind us. Jurgen Klopp's just come off after about 2.5 hours. But at the same time, I thought it was a pretty even game, and then you get, well, it would be wrong if we weren't talking about VAR to finish
Obviously,
the season.
yeah.
Nelson Semedo, yellow card overturned by VAR to a red. What do you make on that decision?
Well, Gary said disappointed, said had it been given as a red initially, he wouldn't have expected VAR to overturn it. So it's fairly similar to where I land, because I think it's a red card tackle, in my opinion. I think it's reckless, I think it's silly, I think he lunges, goes over the ball, catches the player. I think it's dangerous and it's a red card. Obviously, everyone has got entitled to their opinions. There will be plenty of people that disagree with me, but I think it's a red card. However, the issue for Wolves, or the gripe that Wolves will have, which I can understand, is that once the referee is very firmly given a yellow card, is that enough, and is it right for VAR to intervene and overturn it? There's a very strong argument that it isn't. And Gary's argument is that VAR was not brought in to correct moments like that. Is it clear and obvious? Probably not. It's subjective. I thought it was a red card. There's plenty of people that won't think it's a red card. So that's where the gripe will come from Wolves. Albeit, I do think the challenge was silly from Semedo. Semedo, by the way, was had a brilliant season, but was having an absolutely torrid time before getting sent off. He looked tired, out of sorts, getting caught in behind, not recovering, looked like he was really struggling. Then he makes a clumsy mistake and gets sent off.
We'll talk about the ramifications of that and Nelson Semedo's future in a little bit. But first of all, like you say, that 20-minute spell before the end of the first half, where it could have been 3-4-5, and it took them to get into half-time before they did pull themselves together and put in a decent, spirited second-half performance. But the game was over by then, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. The goals, as I've already said, were poor. The first one, it's a great cross from Harvey Elliott, but you can't allow him to do the cross. And then when he does, McAllister gets a run on Santi Bueno, but the height difference and strength and sort of positional difference between these two players means that Santi Bueno should never be getting beaten by Alexis McAllister in the air, and they go 1-0 up. So it's a really poor goal for Wolves to concede. Second one, similar in the avoidable, losing the first ball really as that corner comes in and then not really recovering. And they, as you say, had moments where they could have gone down by a few more goals and the Manchester survived, but then had moments in the second half where they could have scored. Doc has one ruled out, marginally offside. So yeah, overall there were good moments, but they were overshadowed by just a bit of recklessness and just Wolves being caught out when they could have avoided it really.
We saw a Pedro Neto sighting at the end of the game well.
We did. Yeah, great to get him back. They hoped he would get back for the end of the season. He did. He looked lively enough when he came on as well. Had a few decent moments. It's going to be big for him going forward. Obviously, we don't know the Portugal squad yet. It makes me feel that it might be difficult for him to get in, considering the injuries he's had, which might be great news for Wolves, by the way, if you can get him back in over pre-season and give him a full summer training camp. He'll be massive for Wolves next season if he's at the club. Big if, because it's all dependent on this buyer's market, as I keep describing it, whether a club will come in and pay the money for him. It's going to be a bidding war out there for a number of players, not just Pedro Neto, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with him.
Yeah, lots of players' futures are in doubt, you've got to say, at this moment in time. Nelson Semedo being one of those, just because of the contract situation, because of the amount of money he's on, and now he's suspended 3 games to start next season. Now, that's not the be-all all and end all, but it doesn't help. And Rice smiled a joke that Gary Neal said in the post-match press comments, saying that everyone's doing anything to try and keep him, and it's not great, is it? That's the big decision the Wolves, Jeff Shee, Fosun and Gary O'Neill and Matt Hobbs are going to have to make. Yeah, exactly. Gary's made his position very, very clear. I'm desperate to keep Nelson Semedo. If we want to be serious about keeping our best players, it's a big line. It's a really good, really, really big line. If we're serious about keeping our best players, Semedo's huge for us. So he's made it very, very clear. Matt Hobbs, I'm sure, I can't speak for him, but I'm sure will be desperate to keep Nelson Semedo. You know, he's done really well this season. His best season in a Wolves shirt by some distance. And the other side of that, which is a side that fans understandably won't like, but is a reality in the modern game, is that from a business point of view, and of course I'm not sat in the boardroom right now looking at the figures, but from all the information we have, the business decision for Nelson Semedo to leave makes a lot of sense. He's on very high wages for this squad, one of the highest paid players at the club. He's got 1 year left in his deal, will retain some value this summer for a club that may want to purchase him. For all of the financial reasons and business reasons you can think of, Wolves should at 30 years old, should be selling Nelson Semedo. And from every footballing reason that you can think of, Wolves shouldn't be selling Nelson Semedo. And this for me is going to be one of the really interesting ones going into the summer, because it's that battle now between Gary wanting to keep him and I would imagine, again can't speak for them, but I would imagine the powers that be at the club thinking it might be the right time to let him go. So that one's going to be one to watch, as well as Sarabia, who's in a very similar position. Yeah, look, battles is completely the right description, I think, and because there is going to be a lot of battles, and some I think Gary Neal will win and Matt Hobbs, and some they won't win, and it's a case of getting the players, if these players leave, they've got to replace them with some quality and quantity, and that's going to be the big question going into what is a massive summer, because there's going to probably have to be one big sale. You've got to think at least one big sale. Who that is and what position that is, they're already short in a lot of areas of the pitch, apart from maybe arguably centre midfield. So look, there's going to be a lot of questions, and Gary O'Neill wants a squad to compete. They finished 14th this season. It's the lowest they could have really finished, I think. It's disappointing, ironically. They finished 13th last season and they were bottom at Christmas. Now, Gary Neal's done a magnificent job, and I think people cannot overlook that from where this club were 4 days before the start of the season. But he has got to be backed if Wolves are going to really take Gary O'Neill and this football and this squad seriously, that they want to compete, they want to challenge. Because if they don't, and they just want to stay in the league, that's when you get the worst and you fear the worst. You start badly and all of a sudden you're relegated. You can't do that. You've got to push towards that top half of the table, because if you're just happy between 12th and 15th, you've seen the likes of Southampton and a lot of these other clubs that happens to, and then they find themselves in the Championship. Yeah, absolutely. And the quality and quantity is the key phrase there, because Wolves, with a lot of the injury issues this season, have been very, very short in what has been a talented but small squad. And look, just to reiterate where Wolves are at and the strategy going forward, they don't need to sell players. Last summer they needed to, otherwise they were going to have potentially a points deduction coming their way. This summer they don't need to sell players. They could start next season with this exact same squad. But they've got to have a bigger squad, so they have to. Well, let me finish. They could go into next season with the exact same squad, and from a financial point of view, be fine. However, from a footballing point of view, it's again that battle between the two. And Gary's got every right to say, I need a handful, few more players to make this squad bigger, stronger and more capable to compete. So that's the battle. So with a lack of investment coming from Fosun, they will potentially, as you say, need to sell one big asset to bring the money in, to then reinvest and bring players in. So I know there's been a lot of people getting confused between thinking it's contradictory to say that they don't need to sell, but then they do need to sell to bring players in. No, there's a difference between needing to sell to abide by the financial rules and needing to sell to bring players in. There's a very big difference between the two. So Gary's now, again, fighting that battle to see what he can get. He seems, I think, had to have more clarity and perhaps positivity over the situation, having spoken to Jeff now. I think they're aware that they can do a few small bits of business. Che Adams is the player they're talking to, albeit Gary would not be drawn into that when I did ask him today. Which is understandable, of course. And a massive thing that he spoke about in the press conference today was the loan players. They've got so many players out there that are going to have some sort of value, whether that's at Wolves or away from Wolves, to sell them on. And he made a very, very barbed but poignant point to say that
There are players that people have questioned him sending them out on loan. Obviously, there's been questions raised over Fabio Silva and Sasha Kalajdzic going, with Wolves not bringing a number 9 in. He said there were questions over me letting players go, whether it was the right thing for the club, and he said, no, we're better off without them.
100%. That's pretty damning.
And that is verbatim what he said. We're better off without them. For the club and for the culture, they needed to go. So
you can argue who that was, but you got to think the likes of Silva, Guedes, Podence. These are the type of players who you think so. That will more likely than not will not have a future at Wolverhampton Wanderers going forward.
And I don't think that applied to Sasha Kalajdzic.
I don't think so.
From my point of view, as I understand it, Wolves were preparing before his second injury to have him back for next season and playing here, unless obviously something happened in the summer. Of course, he's going to be injured now till probably January anyway. Yeah. So I don't believe that was targeted in his direction, but people can make their own minds up where they think that may have been targeted. But he made a very clear point that the culture is massively important. These loan players will come back. If some of them have got a future at Wolves, I think it sounded like he wanted to keep them around the club and make the squad stronger. If they don't have a future, sell them on and get as much money as you can.
At the same time, when Gary Neal took this job, and I don't think he expected it, I don't think anyone expected Gary Neal to be manager of Wolves to start this season, he knew the constraints, he knew the situation, knew the financial issues that Wolves had, not just this season, but going forward. So there will have to be, like you say, a bit of give and take on both sides. Yeah,
and they have to work collaboratively, get that word out.
It's hard to say.
It's tough for me, to make that happen. Which we've seen in the past that other managers have struggled with that. I think the type of person Gary is, and he made a very important comment I felt on Friday at the press conference. He said, I'm not the kind of person who wants it all my own way all the time. Basically implying, I will give a little bit and I will take a little bit. He's saying he will work with what he's got and he will work with the powers that be, provided he can make this work with the squad.
Yeah.
So that screams to me like, hopefully, a more harmonious summer. But it can't have been much more tumultuous than last summer.
No, tumultuous is correct, yeah. Well, that's it. That's me and you for this season. Our last video from a game, from a stadium. It's been a pleasure. I think it's been a pleasure.
No, it's been a pleasure, but I hate when it ends.
Well, it's okay. We're driving back together. We can chat. We can reminisce.
Reminisce is the right way to put it. Yeah, let's have a trip down memory lane.
Are you positive for next season though?
I am.
I think they've got the right structure. They've got Matt Hobbs, they've got Gary Neal in charge. Gary Neal gets his first pre-season not just as Wolves manager, but as a manager. As a manager. And I think that's going to be massive because of how good a coach he is, because of how he can organise not just his staff but his players. I think he'll be chomping at the bit, and I think you'll see a completely different Wolverhampton Wanderers going into next season.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that Gary made a big point of improving when he first arrived at Wolves was the fitness. He said the players were nowhere near fit enough. That pre-season is going to be tough, I think.
Could be tough for both of us if you said that. Christ.
I'll do a few laps. If it means I get an interview.
Little bleep test.
Yeah, I'll do that. That's fine. I think it's going to be a tough summer in that regard, but a positive summer in that I think Wolves have got the right man at the helm. They've got the right man going forward. They've got the structure you just said there behind them to make it work. It's not going to be easy by any means. There'll be a lot of clubs that are going to have difficult decisions to make. But I think Wolves going into the next season should be in a better place with Gary Neal in charge.
For the final time this season, Liverpool 2, Wolves 0. For all the post-match reaction, make sure you log on to expressandStar.com.